Somewhere in the frozen expanse of what is now northern Europe, roughly 40,000 years ago, a man lies on the cold ground of a shallow cave. His left leg is twisted at an unnatural angle below the knee, the bone shattered from a fall during a hunt. The mammoth they were tracking had turned unexpectedly, and in the chaos of retreat across broken ice, his foot caught between two rocks. The sound of the break was audible even above the wind. Now he lies here, surrounded by the smell of animal hides and wood smoke, his breathing shallow, his face pale with shock. Outside, the temperature is dropping toward levels that would kill an exposed human within hours. He cannot walk, he cannot hunt, he cannot flee from predators. By every measure of individual survival, this man should be dead within days. But he is not alone, and that single fact will change everything. We tend to imagine prehistory as a brutal and unforgiving time, a world where the slightest injury meant swift elimination from the gene pool. Popular culture has reinforced this image for generations. The caveman struggles alone against nature, survives by brute strength, and falls the moment his body fails him. A broken leg in the Paleolithic, we assume, was a death sentence. There was no medicine, no surgery, no antibiotics. Surely a fractured femur or shattered tibia meant abandonment, starvation, or consumption by predators. It is a logical assumption. It is also demonstrably wrong. The archaeological record tells a very different story. Across multiple continents, spanning tens of thousands of years, we find the skeletal remains of ancient humans who survived catastrophic injuries. Femurs that fractured and healed, spines that compressed and fused, skulls that cracked and sealed themselves over months of recovery. These are not minor injuries. These are traumas that would incapacitate any individual for weeks or months, leaving them completely dependent on others for food, water, warmth, and protection. And yet they lived. Some lived for decades after their injuries. The bones themselves bear witness to something profound, something that separates humans from nearly every other species on Earth. These people were cared for. To understand how a broken bone could be survived in prehistory, we must first understand what a broken bone actually does to the body and what it demands from the environment. When a long bone like the femur or tibia fractures, the immediate consequences are severe. Blood vessels within and around the bone tear, causing internal bleeding that can pool into the surrounding tissue. The pain is immense, often enough to induce shock. The limb becomes useless, unable to bear weight or perform coordinated movement. In a modern emergency room, the response is rapid. The bone is stabilized, the patient is given fluids and pain management, and surgical intervention may realign the fragments and secure them with metal hardware. Recovery still takes months. In prehistory, none of this technology existed, but the biology of healing did. Bone is living tissue, constantly being broken down and rebuilt by specialized cells. When a fracture occurs, the body initiates a complex repair process that begins within hours. Blood clotting at the fracture site forms a hematite, a temporary scaffold. Inflammatory cells arrive to clean debris and fight infection. Within days, cartilage begins to form, bridging the gap between bone fragments. Over weeks, this cartilage is gradually replaced by white bone, soft and porous, but structurally sound. Over months, the white bone is remodeled into dense lamellar bone, restoring much of the original strength. This process requires no external intervention. It is automatic, encoded in our genetics. What it does require is stability and time. And that is where human ingenuity enters the picture. Ancient humans understood immobilization long before they had words for it. They observed that a limb held still, healed straighter than one allowed to move. They discovered that wrapping an injured leg between two straight branches prevented the grinding of bone fragments that caused agony and delayed recovery. They learned that certain positions reduced swelling, that cold water numbed pain, that keeping the injured person warm and fed made the difference between life and death. None of this was written down. None of it was formalized into medical doctrine, but it was passed from generation to generation through observation, imitation, and care. The splint is one of humanity's oldest medical technologies, predating agriculture by tens of thousands of years. And we know it was used because we see its results in the bones of the dead. Consider the skeletal evidence from Shanidar Cave in Iraq, where Neanderthal remains dating back 60,000 years reveal individuals with healed fractures, missing limbs, and severe disabilities. One individual, known to researchers as Shanidar 1, had suffered a crushing blow to the left side of his skull, leaving him blind in one eye. His right arm had been fractured and withered, possibly amputated below the elbow. His right leg showed signs of advanced degenerative disease. Yet he lived to middle age, perhaps 40 or older, a remarkable lifespan for his time and condition. He could not have hunted. He could not have defended himself. He survived because others provided for him, protected him, and treated his injuries over years of diminished capacity. This pattern repeats across the archaeological record. At Romito Cave in Italy, a young male from 17,000 years ago shows a severe form of dwarfism that would have left him dependent on others from birth. At Sungir in Russia, 2 children buried 30,000 years ago with elaborate grave goods suggest individuals who were valued despite contributing little to subsistence activities. At sites across Africa, Asia, and Europe, we find healed fractures in every conceivable bone, from ribs to vertebrae to the delicate bones of the feet. Each healed fracture is a testament to weeks or months of enforced rest, during which the injured individual consumed resources without contributing to their acquisition. This represents an investment, a choice made by the group to sustain someone who could not sustain themselves. The decision to care for an injured member was not without cost. In a world where calories were earned through exhausting physical labor, every additional mouth to feed represented a drain on collective resources. Hunters brought back meat at irregular intervals, and the distribution of food was a matter of survival for everyone. An injured person needed more than their share, consuming calories for healing while producing nothing in return. They also demanded attention, someone to bring water, to adjust their position, to keep the fire burning through the night. Every hour spent tending the wounded was an hour not spent gathering, hunting, or watching for predators. And yet groups made this choice, repeatedly, across thousands of generations. The bones do not lie. Our ancestors cared for their broken. Why would they do this? The cynical answer is reciprocity. If you care for me when I am injured, I will care for you when you are injured. This kind of mutual aid would have been reinforced over time, creating social norms that benefited everyone. But reciprocity alone cannot explain the care given to children, the elderly, or individuals with permanent disabilities who would never repay the investment. Something deeper was at work. Humans are social animals in a way that transcends simple exchange. We form emotional bonds that persist through hardship. We experience empathy, the capacity to feel the suffering of others as if it were our own. We are motivated by love, by loyalty, by a sense of obligation that defies cold calculation. These emotions are not weaknesses to be overcome. They are adaptations, honed by natural selection because they increase the survival of groups that possess them. A band of humans that abandoned its injured members would save calories in the short term, but would lose something far more valuable. It would lose the knowledge held by experienced hunters, the skills of craftsmen who made the best tools, the wisdom of elders who remembered where water could be found in drought years. It would lose the trust that bound members together, the willingness to take risks, knowing that others would help if things went wrong. A group that cared for its wounded could afford to be bolder, to attempt hunts that were dangerous but rewarding, to explore territories that were unknown but potentially rich. The injured survivor who returned to productivity months later carried scars that reminded everyone of what the group could endure together. Those scars were proof of something more powerful than individual strength. The dangers of a serious fracture in prehistory were real and should not be minimized. Infection was an ever-present threat. An open fracture, where the bone pierced the skin, exposed the wound to bacteria that could cause sepsis and death within days. Even closed fractures could become infected if the skin was broken by external trauma or if the patient's immune system was compromised by malnutrition. Ancient humans had no antibiotics, no understanding of germ theory, no sterile instruments. They relied on the body's natural defenses and on practices that may have reduced contamination without understanding why. Washing wounds with clean water, applying plant materials with antimicrobial properties, keeping the injury covered and dry. Some of these practices worked, many did not. Infection killed countless individuals whose bones never had the chance to heal. Immobility brought its own dangers. A person unable to move was unable to flee from predators, unable to relocate with the group when resources shifted, unable to escape natural disasters like floods or fires. During the Ice Age, remaining stationary in one location for months was often impossible. Game migrated, water sources froze or dried up, and hostile groups or animals could threaten any fixed position. Caring for an injured person meant either delaying the movement of the entire group or constructing some means of transport to bring them along. There is evidence that ancient humans built travois, simple sleds of poles and hides that could be dragged across snow or grass. These devices would have allowed a fractured leg to be moved without weight bearing, a crucial capability for nomadic peoples who could not afford to stay in one place indefinitely. Starvation threatened both the injured and their caregivers. A prolonged recovery drained food reserves that might have sustained the group through lean months. If the injury occurred just before winter, the entire band might face shortages as a direct result of caring for one person. These were not decisions taken lightly. We can imagine the discussions that took place, the weighing of resources against relationships, the painful acknowledgement that some injuries simply could not be survived. Not every broken bone was treated. Not every injured person was saved. The archaeological record is biased toward survivors, toward those whose bones had time to heal and be preserved. We do not see the countless individuals who were lost, whose remains scattered before they could tell their stories. Survival was never guaranteed, but it was attempted, again and again, with whatever resources could be spared. The role of pain tolerance in ancient survival is often overlooked. Modern humans, accustomed to readily available analgesics, have lost touch with the capacity for endurance that our ancestors possessed. Pain is a signal, a warning that something is wrong and should be protected. But pain can also be managed through psychological mechanisms that remain poorly understood. Distraction, meditation, social support, and altered states of consciousness all affect pain perception. Ancient humans may have used plant-based substances to dull pain, chewing willow bark that contained compounds similar to aspirin or consuming preparations of poppies that would later give us opium. They may have used ritual and trance to shift awareness away from physical sensation, or they may simply have endured, as humans have always endured, because the alternative was death and they wanted to live. The healing time for a major fracture depends on many factors: age, nutrition, the location and severity of the break, the quality of immobilization, and the absence of infection all play roles. A simple fracture in a young, well-fed adult might heal enough for limited weight bearing in 6 to 8 weeks. A complex fracture in an older or malnourished individual might take months longer and might never fully heal. The bones of ancient skeletons often show malunion, where fragments healed in imperfect alignment, leaving shortened limbs or abnormal angles. These imperfections would have caused chronic pain and disability. Yet the individuals lived, they adapted, they found new roles within their groups that did not require the physical capabilities they had lost. This adaptation is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of ancient injury survival. A hunter who could no longer run might become a toolmaker, spending his days chipping flint into blades and points that others would carry on the hunt. An elder who could no longer walk long distances might become a keeper of knowledge, teaching the young about plants, animals, routes, and traditions. A woman with a healed arm fracture might specialize in tasks that required less strength but more skill, processing hides or making clothing or tending children. The division of labor in ancient societies was flexible, shaped by necessity rather than rigid roles. An injury that ended one form of contribution could open the door to another. Survival meant adaptation, and adaptation meant community. What does this tell us about who we are? It tells us that compassion is not a modern luxury invented in the comfort of civilization. It is an ancient instinct, wired into our brains by millions of years of evolution in small, interdependent groups. The capacity to recognize suffering in others and to be moved to alleviate it is as fundamental to human nature as the capacity for language or tool use. It is what allowed our ancestors to survive in environments that should have killed them, to recover from injuries that should have been fatal, to endure hardships that would have overwhelmed any individual acting alone. The broken bone that healed is not just evidence of biological function. It is evidence of something far more important. It is proof that someone cared. When we look at the skeleton of a 40,000-year-old human with a healed femur fracture, we are looking at the physical residue of love. Someone brought this person water when they could not reach it themselves. Someone fed them when they could not gather or hunt. Someone kept the fire burning through long, cold nights and watched for predators when they could not defend themselves. Someone splinted the leg with sticks and sinew, adjusted the position to reduce swelling, and endured the screams of pain during the long weeks of recovery. We will never know their names. We will never know what they said to each other, or what promises were made in the darkness of a cave that smelled of smoke and blood. But we know they were there because the bones remember.